so gay. The meadowlarks are singing, joys in the air. Come set your bells a-ringing, you've gladness to share. Hello there, Sister Dewdrop, linger a little while. Your colors in the sunlight would make a monarch smile. What need have I for treasures, diamonds or gold? The fairest of all pleasures are here to behold. Hello there, dearest kinsmen, pebbles and laughing brooks, you timid little beetles that hide in private nooks. God made us of his gladness, come then and sing, to cure the world of sadness, so ring, bluebell ring. To cure the world of sadness, so ring, bluebell ring. To cure the world of sadness, so ring, bluebell ring.
I'd like to welcome everyone to our Sunday service. Special welcome to all of our guests here at the Expanding Light, as well as at our meditation retreat, and all of those great souls watching on the internet. I'd like to read to you from the book Rays of the One Light, with commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita and the Bible, written by Swami Ananda. Today's topic is Truth invites, it never commands. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. Free will is a basic principle of life. God never coerces. He invites us to live in such a way that we find fulfillment in ourselves. If we refuse to live rightly, Paramahansa Yogananda taught, God simply says, I will wait. We have eternity to live. In that eternity we live as we choose, in self-created darkness, a darkness as intense and as long-lasting as we choose, or in the infinite light, the true self, which is God. Jesus Christ in the Beatitudes offered a beautiful example of God's way of inviting mankind to seek perfection, not by commanding, but by offering as human children the incentive they need to choose the right of their own volition. Blessed are the poor in spirit, Jesus said, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. In each of the Beatitudes, Jesus explains the blessing attendant upon observing it. The divine way, similarly, for each of us, is not to do violence to our own natures. Spirituality must be attained naturally. It can never be attained by force. The Bhagavad Gita says in the 3rd chapter, even the wise behave in accordance with nature as it is manifested in them. Of what avail then is suppression? The scripture then goes on, however, to explain that this doesn't mean we should surrender to the dictates of our lower nature. Rather, it emphasizes our need to aspire to the heights. But each of us in accordance with his own nature, and not in imitation of anyone else's, of offering ourselves up for purification by divine grace. Desire whatever form it takes, so the Bhagavad Gita explains. Desire, whatever form it takes, so the Bhagavad Gita explains, should be resisted, if only mentally. Attachment and repulsion to sense objects, both of these are universally rooted. No one should accept their influence, for verily they are man's enemies. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om.
I'd also like to welcome you to Sunday service today. It's a joy to share this time together every week. Very nice. So and I am Nayaswami Parvati. This is Nayaswami Prana, but we're kind of trading when we introduce each other now. But Whispers from Eternity has lovely, beautiful poems in it, and they're realized things. This one, lead my body chariot on the right path. Teach me, Lord, to conquer myself by myself. Bless me that my discrimination become the charioteer of the steeds of my 5 senses, firmly holding the reins in my mind. Let my soul, riding on the wheels of discipline in the little chariot of my body, drive triumphantly over the speedway of earth lives until, on the last lap of the last race, it finds itself safe, O King of Kings, in thy vast royal palace. So the topic today, as usual, is a very interesting one, and truth does invite, it can't command, because it's not how it works spiritually. And anybody who's been on the spiritual path for even a little time, you begin to realize that it has to be from my own volition, my own desire, my own will. And it's why Sri Yukteswar made that very strong statement that he said, you cannot take one step forward on the spiritual path until you begin to develop the heart's natural love. Because that desire that we use our own will, one of the main things that separates human beings from all the other creatures out there is that element of free will. And that always has to be there. Never forget that. On the spiritual path, if you're ever feeling overburdened by somebody else, or something's feeling imposed by you, it can't work that way. It's not true if it comes with that kind of feeling to it. It has to be, and a lot of times when we accept spiritual truths, we have to reach for it. Remember, we're all here to grow. And so it's not necessarily going to feel comfortable at first. Maybe it may feel a little intimidating, the offering that's put before you, and you may feel like, oh wow, can I? But if it's true, it will lead to what the affirmation talked about, inner freedom and joy. And so you can always kind of judge, is this thing that's before me going to lead to truth? Is it coming from truth? Is it an invitation from truth? Or is it something other? Maybe ego, maybe somebody else's desire for us, or their need, or whatever. But you can always judge that invitation before you by the fact of, does it feel true to you? So it's interesting. Right now, we have a study group. We met all last year, and we use the essence of the Bhagavad Gita as our focal point. And these are all people that have lived here at the village for a number of years, and some of them very long time. And so we had a lot of fun with that. We just went through. The Gita is so amazing that it doesn't really matter what chapter you're on. All the teachings are in there. All the things that you need to focus on are really come up in the study of that. I don't quite know what's happening here. But at any rate, this year we decided as a group that we would focus on the autobiography of a yogi. Now, I just went through and read the whole autobiography again this time, from page 1 to the end. I thought I'll just take it that way. I've dive into it, all the different chapters, but because this year as a whole, Ananda as a whole, we're focusing on the autobiography, I thought, let me just go through the whole thing. And now we're coming back in our group. We've started out chapter 1, my early years, and my parents and my early years. And when you read it with the idea in mind that you're studying it, it's a little different. And the thought that came to my mind as we just met last week, and we had a lot of fun, but the thought that came to my mind was, what is it about the autobiography of a yogi that has millions of people having read it? It's just phenomenal. And Yogananda said it has my vibrations, but the first sentence, and this was written in English, really in the West, in America, by Yogananda, wrote it in Encinitas, for American and Western audiences. The first sentence is about the disciple-guru relationship. I mean, wow, what a place to start. And from there he goes on to introduce reincarnation, and then he introduces his parents and the fact that they were normal, they were married, they had 8 children, and his father had a real job, worked for the Bengal Nagpur Railway and was vice president. His mother was a housewife and cared for the children. And then there's the wheat field and the appearance of Lahiri Mahashai on page 8, because his good friend and employee, Kedarnath Babu, I think. Anyway, I'll remember these names as I can. Is really sad because he asked for a week off to go see his guru, Lahiri Mahashaya, in Benares. And he's made fun of by Bhagavati, by Yogananda's father. He said, "Oh, don't be a fanatic. What do you want to do that for? You'll get ahead if you just do good at your job." And then they walk home together. He meets him on the way home, and Lahiri Mahashai appears to them. And because it's India, these things do have sense to them. And so Lahiri Mahashai says to him, "Bhagavati, you're too hard on your employee." And then that vision fades, and the disciple is ecstatic, and Bhagavati, being a practical man and yet in the context of India, says, "Well, not only do I give you permission to go for a week, but if anybody can appear in a wheat field before me, I will also go and I'll take my wife." And so they all go. This is just in the first few pages. They all go off to Varanasi for a week, and they immediately accept discipleship and Kriya Yoga initiation from Lahiri Mahashai. So this is, and then we're back to the family and the guru. Lahiri Mahashai's picture traveled with them wherever they went. And so Yogananda just rolls out all of these things, just boom, boom, boom. But it is done, at least this is my perspective on it, it is done with a real invitation from truth. He's inviting you from the first sentence to come into this reality, which happened not that long ago. He wrote it in 1946. These things were taking place in the early 1900s, a lot of them. And so it's within the context that people could maybe relate to, and he does talk about a family that seems kind of normal, but then they have this guru and all of this, but he just rolls it out, and it's so kindly written and so just simple and inviting, even though it's about all this incredible phenomena that people in the mid-1800s in America, most of them had never heard of before. Disciple-guru relationship, reincarnation, visions of your guru, your guru, wow. So anyway, but that just keeps rolling out. Second chapter's about his mother's passing and the silver amulet that he receives as an 11 or 12-year-old boy, I think a 12-year-old boy, that really takes him deep spiritually. And the third chapter is about Swami Pranabananda, the saint with 2 bodies. And Yogananda he gives that as a real example of himself being just this young kid, and he went, and Pranabananda knows everything, and he's so surprised, and he was having us really go with him and presenting all of us as we might see it. And so Pranabananda, it turns out, as Yogananda later said about him, he's not a well-known saint in Varanasi. The man who goes to see him had met him a couple of times, but had no idea that he could bilocate or, do anything phenomenal. But later on, Yogananda, when asked, said, Swami Pranabhananda was one of only two, other than our line of gurus, one of only two saints mentioned in the autobiography of all of those saints who was completely fully liberated. And that's what it looked like. He had a simple house. He had the two pensions. Remember, he had, and remember how he got that pension? And again, we're talking about pensions. He had a job for the railway, and Bhagavati was his employer, and he couldn't really work anymore. And so he went to Lahiri Mahashaya and he said, I don't know what to do. I feel like I can't physically work anymore, but I've only been working for not that long, a few years. He was a fairly young man, but he and a friend had been meditating 8 hours every night, and he was feeling a lot of kundalini. And so Lahiri said, well, just say what you feel. And so, and again, remember, this is in the context, the British owned the railways. So, and the Indians worked for them, but it was a very logical, rational job and all of that. In other words, those people had that consciousness. And so Pranabhananda just followed what his guru said. He said, I feel I'm unfit for work anymore because I feel this sensation, rising energy in my spine that makes me unable to do my job any longer. And the man who he gave that to said, oh, sounds great. So he just signed him off, and and they all. So he got the pension, and he said, I have two pensions to Yogananda as a young boy. He got that pension, and then he said, and I have a pension from God, because now I'm able to really fully engage in that spiritual life. But all of this happens in just a few pages as you read the autobiography. So I think Yogananda wrote that in a way, because it doesn't have the feeling of just introducing philosophical concepts or the culture of India. It's a spiritual invitation to the West, to you can come, you can be part of this. This is something that's accessible to you. And he offers that without any expectations. It has to be freely offered. It's not conditioned. It's not a command. It's a broad offering to come into that and to start to explore it at least. And remember, millions of people having read it, it means all levels of society in the West and the East at this point. I mean, it's been translated all over the world. But that soul invitation, that soul call is felt. There's a match there for every single person that reads that. So it's quite thrilling to think about it in that way, because it really, and we all know this, I mean, I'm not telling you anything new, but just to kind of focus in on that and to realize what an incredible invitation that Yogananda put out in that way to people in the West and people really worldwide. Now, as it also says in the reading, we all perceive these things depending on our own level of consciousness. So people read the autobiography and get a lot of different things out of it. It depends on where we're at. If you are highly evolved, you might read it and go into samadhi and you're done, But for people looking for the spiritual path and not having found it, then they want to look more. For people who are just looking for truth, then they want to look more. Swami Kriyananda said, I often ask audiences, how many people here have read the autobiography? And at least half of the audience would raise their hands, but only a few of them ever took up Yogananda's path, the path of Kriya Yoga, path of self-realization. They just went out in a lot of different directions because it awakened them spiritually, generally. And that's fine. That was a good thing to have happen. But when you get to the point where you really want something more, then you're looking for, and you see in the autobiography that deep spiritual invitation to you personally, every single person personally here, and you respond in that way. As we all go along spiritually, I thought it was just interesting that, it was nice that the choir this morning sang that song inspired by St. Francis. Pranaba and I will go to Italy, Ananda, Sisi, in a couple of weeks. We haven't been there for 17 years. It's just been a long time. We lived there for a period of time in 1989 and 90. We're not that old. We didn't live in the 18... It's a miracle. But anyway, we'll go back there. And I was remembering the very first time I went there was the mid-1980s, so 85. And someone there took us to Fonte Colombo, which is a beautiful spot, a little out of the way. Not everyone goes there. It was an Italian woman, Renata Arlini. And she wanted us to go there because it is the place, and there's a little cave there where supposedly St. Francis wrote the rule for the Friars Minor. And so she had Swami sit up there, and then everybody that came, there was a big group, could go up and get blessed by him in that spot. And I thought, oh boy. Anyway, it was a little uncomfortable, but it was fine. And but then, because we knew about that, it inspired me just to learn more about what happened there. And in the stories of St. Francis, it's not always told, but St. Francis, after living for a while with the brothers that were coming, he received in vision, he said, we need a rule. We need to go back to the Pope in Rome and present him with an outline for what we're doing. And so he wrote this rule, Vision from Christ, and it was just exactly how they were living. So it was, you should have nothing, you should own nothing, no books, no property, no nothing, and live in joy but depend on God. That was it. And so he took that to the theologians in Rome, and they looked at it and they said, this can't work for an order. It's not enough. It's not right, or I don't know what they said to him. So they said, can you please go and rewrite it? And so, he felt pretty bad because Christ had given it to him. What was the problem? And so he did. He went back and he asked again, and it came out the same. And so he took it back. He presented it again because, again, it was a serious thing. It was from Christ directly. And so he gave it again, and when they looked at it again, the theologians in Rome, and probably the Pope as well, after a little time they conveniently lost it and wrote their own for the Friars Minor. So I don't know that anybody ever had seen that, but it's known that it was very simple and just simply based on how they were actually living. So fast forward hundreds of years, 800 years, to us here at Ananda. And we have what Swami Kriyananda originally in 1987 wrote called the Rules of Conduct for Monastic Order Members. Now it's called the Guidelines, which it's just fine. But it's interesting that he says this in the beginning, and it's important for all of us to understand this, that he wrote that based on the actual lifestyle that had evolved over years here at the village. And so it wasn't a form, because you hear the rule or the guidelines, and people, again, take that from where their consciousness is. but it was written just because of how we were living, how it had evolved, what we were, in other words, what we were actually doing. Not a form put on to confine people, but to describe our way of life. And it was so sweet. I remember reading it when it came out, and I thought, yep, feels like what we do here, you know. Just, it wasn't surprising at all. And there may have been one or two things where he suggested things that we hadn't evolved yet. But for the most part, very just descriptive of how our life is here. And so, you know, we can look at things and think, ooh, you know, guidelines and rules and stuff like that. But really, if you look at it from that way, it's really just simply describing our way of life. And, you know, simple things in it. Nobody owns their house. We're stewards. You know, they're things for attitudes of mind to, again, make you free. You know, it's for joy and freedom. Children are not possessions. You know, these can be shocking statements to some people. But again, the community as a whole, it's your home, all of it. And the people that live here, they're your spiritual family. You know, so things that just, again, come in to really support all of us and to describe, really, and you recognize how your own attitudes are, how your own understanding is of what we do here. And it's been revised over the years a little bit, language that, you know, better matches who we are at this point. But it's still that basic understanding. So again, these things like that rule, those guidelines, they're invitations from truth for how we can live in ways. We're trying to bring new ways of living into being right now. Ananda Village is a prime example of that. And people, when they come here, they feel that. What do you do here? What are you based on? How do you live? So anyway, just interesting. And then there's the more personal part of how that truth is offered. And I was thinking of just a couple of stories of Yogananda relating to disciples that you get the feeling of just kind of the lightness and the expectation, how open it was. It's the two that I thought of are Dr. Lewis and his wife. And the first one, again, these are stories that many of you know, but again, looked at from that, is this truth inviting me? You know, they had gone on a long trip, the Lewises with Master, and this was fall of right around this time, 1949, and they were in San Francisco. They had traveled all day up the coast, and they were all really tired, and they went out to dinner, and that was kind of interesting. And then they went home, and they had a room adjoining Master's room, and he kept the door open. And so they were really tired, and so Mrs. Lewis said, "We're sleeping." She saw the door open. She said, "We're sleeping." Yep. And so they laid down. And Dr. Lewis, he told this story to Swami Kriyananda and the other monks, and he said, you know, Master doesn't sleep. And he really doesn't want us to spend as much time in the subconscious, which is what you do when you sleep. And so they were just drifting off to sleep when he said, "Sabgam," loudly enough that they could hear. And then let it go a little bit, and then Sabgam Daf. And Mrs. Lewis at this point is getting the idea that it's not going to be a nice night, not going to be a sleeping night. And so, you know, she says, no, we're sleeping. And as Dr. Lewis said, she turned to the wall for help. And then, super Sabgam Daf, just rolling out, nothing other than that. And then finally, super submarine Sabgam Daf. And at that point, Dr. Lewis said we couldn't do anymore. So, but just think about it. That was an invitation from Yogananda. He wanted to spend time with them. They could have shut the door. They could have shut the door. Wouldn't that be shocking? But they could have. Some people might have. So I'm so exhausted I cannot even deal with this. But they didn't. And he said, Dr. Lewis, he said, we got up and we spent the rest of the night talking with Yogananda, discussing all kinds of things, spiritual matters. Then we meditated, and it was the end of the night by the time they were done. So that night was not spent in sleep. But he said it was very sweet, but again, open. Yogananda didn't say, Dr. and Mrs. Lewis, why don't you come in here and let's... Nope. He just floated out a word. Sabgam. That was one of the Chinese dishes they had that night. Sabgam. Just to kind of test the waters, see what it felt like, and then proceeded on. Because they were very close, so he could do that with them. And then the other story that I found very interesting, it's a little more, I don't know. Anyway, it's simple. But it's that one of Mrs. Lewis. So the Lewises moved from Boston clear to California, to Encinitas. They lived there. And they were there, I think, probably not too long when this happened. But they had gone out. Master liked to go out for drives and buying fruit along the road and all of that. So they bought watermelon. And in India, watermelon pickle is a real delicacy. And so when they got back, he said, let's make watermelon pickle. Well, anything like that is not easy to make. And so he got them started, Master, and then a group, and Mrs. Lewis was part of that. Dr. Lewis wasn't, I don't know for what reason, but at any rate, he got them started, and, they have to peel everything, they have to pickle it, I think they had to boil it, whatever it was a laborious process. And there were quite a few watermelons. And by midnight, so Yogananda left after he got them started. And then over the hours, one by one, every person disappeared, except Mrs. Lewis. So she was there. She was pretty feisty. She was there, but she, by midnight, was going, okay, this is ridiculous, So interesting how this works. She went back to the room. Her husband was there. They lived there in Encinitas. And she said, this is what's happened. What should I do? And he said, your guru asked you to do that. You better go back and finish it. And she, God bless her, went back and worked the rest of the night finishing that. Now, it's like, what would you all think? I don't really need to, watermelon pickle, who needs watermelon pickle? It wasn't about the watermelon pickle. It was about that invitation of Yogananda's for truth and an opportunity to grow. What Mrs. Lewis said, she finished it. She said Yogananda was really happy that she finished it. He didn't say anything to her as far as I understand. But she said, after that, I never felt tired. I never felt tired after that. She had felt exhausted, but it just, there was a blessing there. And so, for all of us, we'll receive those invitations from truth all the time, really. Yogananda isn't in his body, Swami Kriyananda isn't in his body, but they still come anyway. They come through circumstances, they come through your guru bhais, they come through many different ways. So I was just thinking, be aware, because those invitations from the truth, they're what will help you to grow spiritually and give you strength. Because there's not, if we just are in our own desires and floating with Maya, and it's easy to do. Everybody does it. It's not hard to just get caught and, well, everything's going along okay, let's not disturb it, But really, really look for those opportunities where you can go deeper spiritually, and ones that are not, they're not being put on you, but they're being offered to you, and you can feel the difference in the energy. So really look for those. They're, when people come here, and I'll sometimes, just in talking, say, yeah, I've lived all over with Ananda, and they'll say, well, who decided where you were going to go? And I said, I did. Because you've got the guru, you've got the spiritual teacher who told you what to do, is what they're saying. And all I can say is the ways that those invitations from truth came to me from Swami. How's your Italian? Subgum duff, How's your Italian? We thought you might enjoy. How would you like to? Move to San Francisco, go to Italy, whatever it was. So put out in a way that's open, because again, comes back to free will. If I didn't engage in that with my own love and desire and wanting to, it wouldn't be a really great gift and an invitation. It would be just something, oh, well, yeah, they say I have to do it, so they, No, it's about me. And just accepting that consciously and really going for that. Where there's a need, where there's an opportunity for growth, wherever that happens, be aware. That movie of Yogananda, Awake, be awake, because those opportunities, those invitations are floating out there. Some of them are stronger than others, but really look for the ones that will help you to grow spiritually. And you can test them. You do something, and around the energy you feel, you do it, and it produces joy. Or it doesn't. It just feels more of a burden. So again, you have to test things out. We all do. But really look for those, because those are they're coming to us from our masters and from Swami Kriyananda and from our Guru Bhais. And they will be the thing that really helps us to keep growing spiritually and helps us in that process of finding God. As Yogananda said, the time for knowing God has come.
I've heard your flute high on a cloud, your call I can't resist. Oh, let me come and play with you. We'll scatter music with the dew and sound the morning mist. I've heard you piping on a hill, all else I've set aside. Oh, let us dance the mountain peaks. We'll skip with breezes on the creeks and soar the valleys wide. Your flute has called me to the fields. Now I've no place to live. Don't send me back, rejected friend. Whatever I call mine must end. All that I am I give. I hear your call in every tree, in every flower and stream, and sweetest melody of all, a song that heaven's joy recalls.